I always believed my life was as ordinary as the morning dew glistening on the garden roses. My name is Hortense Fairchild. Yes, a name that often prompts raised eyebrows and polite chuckles, but I wouldn't trade it for any other. I'm 72 years old, with silver-streaked auburn hair neatly braided down the length of my back, and eyes that still sparkle with curiosity. My days have been filled with simple pleasures, tending to the garden, baking bread, and knitting blankets for the local animal rescue shelter. In the small English town of Willowbrook where I live, time moves slowly, and the weight of years settles upon your shoulders like a comforting shawl. But nothing in my long life prepared me for what happened last Tuesday. It began like any other morning. I awoke at dawn, cradled by the familiar creaks of my cottage. The sunlight filtered through the lace curtains as I padded into the kitchen, humming an old folk tune. My dear husband, Arthur, passed away 5 years ago, and though I still miss him dearly, I've grown accustomed to solitude. It's a gentle loneliness, softened by the presence of my daughter Isabella, she calls me Nan, and my 2 grandchildren Jade and Max. Isabella is a school teacher in nearby Bristol, and the children live with her and her husband Colin. They are my world, my reason for breathing when grief threatened to take me under. As I prepared my morning tea, an Earl Grey with just a hint of milk, I noticed my phone blinking insistently on the counter. Video call. It was Isabella. I smiled, wiping my hands on my apron before answering. "Good morning, my darling," I greeted her, beaming. "Morning, Mum. Can you watch the twins while I run an errand? I need to pick up Max's new glasses. Colin's stuck at work. I'll be back in an hour." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Of course, dear. Send the link. They're in the living room. I'll keep them entertained." Minutes later, I was seated on the floral-patterned sofa in the living room, knitting needles in hand, when Jade and Max bounded in. Jade was 5, lively with a cascade of chestnut curls and inquisitive green eyes. Max was 3, sturdy and quiet, clutching a battered teddy bear. We settled into a routine. I worked on a baby blanket for the animal shelter, and they built towers of wooden blocks, their laughter echoing through the room. The video call connected, and I saw Isabella perched on a stool by the window, sunlight haloing her brown hair. Behind her, the kitchen looked neat and unremarkable, until a sudden voice cut through the screen like a jagged shard of glass. "I don't care what kind of afternoon tea menu she's got planned. I'm telling you, Rosie, she's not going to be at the funeral." My hands froze mid-knit. Funeral? I frowned, my heart stuttering. A funeral in the family? But it wasn't mine. I watched Isabella's face twist with shock, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. I leaned forward, squinting at the screen, when a woman with sleek blonde hair and cruel blue eyes appeared beside Isabella. It was my sister-in-law, Morgana Fairchild, Colin's sister, who, even after decades of family gatherings, I still found unsettling. She'd married into the family 15 years ago, and though Arthur had loved her like his own, Morgana never quite accepted me. She'd made that apparent with snide remarks and veiled insults, yet I'd always turned my other cheek. Now, her voice was cold as ice. "Of course she's not going. She thinks she's too good for us. I heard she's spending the weekend in Bath, sipping tea with those snooty friends of hers." I'd spent most of my life in Willowbrook, but I had friends scattered across the West Country, women I'd met through charity work, gardening clubs, and the church, and I wasn't ashamed of any of them. But what pinged sharply in my chest was the implication that I would refuse to attend a funeral of someone I loved. "Mom?" Isabella's voice wavered, and she turned from the counter to face Morgana. "What are you talking about?" Morgana scoffed. "Isabel, dear, don't play innocent. You heard Aunt Felicity died. Cancer, wasn't it? And your mother thinks she's too busy. She'll regret it when her precious funeral arrives." Felicity. My dearest sister-in-law on Arthur's side, a woman of warmth and laughter who'd been one of the few people outside of my immediate family who truly understood me. She'd always had time for me, even when Morgana ridiculed my humble cottage or my modest wardrobe. Felicity had been like a younger sister, offering support when Arthur passed, and I'd hoped to be at her side now. No, that can't be true. My voice emerged hoarse, trembling. The knitting needles clicked together as I unconsciously pressed them tight. You're lying. Isabella's knuckles whitened as she gripped the kitchen countertop. Mom, she just said, Rosie, please. Morgana's tone was silk wrapped around a blade. I'm not lying. Auntie Felicity passed this morning, and the funeral is next Thursday in Oxford. Everyone's expected, but your mother said she's making a trip to Bath with friends. My mind spun. Bath. I'd promised Felicity I'd visit her the first week of June. We'd planned a day together. Tea at the Royal Crescent Hotel. A stroll through the botanical gardens. A late lunch at that little cafe she adored near the Avon. I'd been looking forward to it for months, but this was garbled nonsense. A funeral should never be a surprise, not for those last rites we'd vowed to share. Colin's coming, Morgana added, her lips curling into a smug smile. He's already booked his flight. He told me himself. Isabella's eyes glistened with tears. Let me call Colin. She flicked her fingers at a button on the screen. The call ended. Silence stretched like a tightrope between us. Jade looked at me, puzzled, and started to tug at my shawl. I shook my head gently, forcing a smile. It's okay, sweetheart. Let me fix your blocks. I dropped the yarn on my lap and stood, regaining composure. My heart was a caged bird pounding violently. Moments later, Isabella reconnected to the call. She looked harrowed, her cheeks stained with tears. Morgana had already vanished, leaving a void in the screen where her cruel presence had been. Mum, she whispered. I'm here, dear. What did Colin say? He's in Boston for a conference and didn't get the news. He's calling Aunt Margaret. See if she knows. Her voice cracked. Oh, Mum, I don't know what to do. I swallowed, drawing a deep breath to steady myself. Come sit down, darling. Take a breath. I motioned for Jade to play quietly. The girl accepted the instruction, though her brow furrowed. I settled back on the sofa, pulling Jade onto my lap and gathering Max beside me. I held them in my arms as though they were tiny anchors tethering me to reality. Isabella, love. Did Aunt Margaret confirm it? My voice was soft, but it betrayed a tremor. Isabella nodded, wiping her nose on the back of her hand. Yes. Margaret says Felicity passed peacefully in her sleep early this morning. Complications from the chemotherapy. The funeral arrangements are being handled by the family in Oxford. Morgana insisted on sharing the details so that no one would be surprised, but she's lying about me being in Bath. I closed my eyes, picturing Felicity's kind face last time. She'd sent me a letter last month, painted with cheerful words and splotches of watercolor daisies. She'd been too frail to visit the garden, but she asked about my roses and gardenias, and I'd promised to bring her a bouquet next week. That promise felt like shards of a broken mirror now. Mum, what do I do? Isabella's voice was raw, laden with guilt. I'm supposed to be here for Jade and Max, but... She glanced at them, and they waved their little hands at the camera, oblivious to the tension crackling through the room. You stay with them, sweetheart. I'll make arrangements for the funeral. You stay right where you are. Don't rush anything. Focus on the children. Isabella's eyes glistened with gratitude. Thank you. I'll stay with them. I'll call you when I know more. I nodded, though she couldn't see it. I love you, dear. I've got this. She blew me a kiss, and the call ended. I sat there in stunned silence for a moment, the hum of the video call afterglow still flickering in my ears. The children resumed their play, unaware of the storm that had just broken. I ran my hand through my silver hair, trying to summon the strength I needed to navigate what lay ahead. Aunt Felicity had been the last link to my late husband's side of the family, and now even that bond felt strained by Morgana's lies. I'd attended every holiday, every birthday party, and now I was expected to somehow make it to Oxford in mere days. My knees ached at the thought of the train ride. I'd grown old and brittle. I wasn't sure if I could handle the crowd, the sorrow, or the bitterness that Morgana seemed determined to sow. But Felicity deserved better than telegraphed indifference and false rumors. She'd been my dear friend, and I owed her that much. I set the children up with a coloring book and biscuits, promising them I'd bake more later. Once they were busy with crayons and giggles, I rose stiffly from the sofa and made my way to the study. The walls were lined with dusty volumes of poetry and memoirs, my late husband's cherished collection, and a large oak desk cluttered with bills and old photographs. I sat at the desk and retrieved my checkbook. I'd need money for train, tickets, and proper attire. My funeral dress, the navy blue silk I wore to so many events, had been moth-eaten and stored in the attic. I pulled down the oak ladder and climbed up, my legs trembling. The attic was cold and smelled of cedar and time. I rummaged through several boxes of old dresses until my fingers closed around the fabric of that navy blue gown. It was smaller than I remembered, the waist tighter, as if the dress had shrunk after years of rest. I sighed and decided it was better than nothing. Clothes alone weren't enough. I needed to inform the funeral home. I dialed the number Felicity'd given me in her last letter, and a somber gentleman answered. I introduced myself as Hortense Fairchild, Felicity Morton's sister-in-law, and asked for confirmation of the funeral details. He told me the service would be held at St. Mary's Church in Oxford at 2 o'clock next Thursday, followed by a burial in the Morton family plot. Visitors could gather at the church hall afterward, where tea and sandwiches would be served. He paused before adding gently, "I'm so sorry for your loss, Mrs. Fairchild." Tears pricked my eyes. I thanked the man and hung up, my world narrowing. To the funeral service, the black veil I'd likely don over my face, the weight of grief pressing down on me once more. Yet, beneath the sorrow, a flame of defiance burned. Morgana's words had wounded me deeply, but I refused to believe her lies. I'd go to Oxford, stand by Felicity's side, and prove that love and loyalty could not be so easily discarded. Rest of the day passed in a haze. I called my neighbor, Beatrice, to ask if she could look after the children for a few hours, while I made a quick trip into town to find a black shawl to go with the dress. Beatrice agreed without hesitation. She'd always been like an older sister to me. I packed a small suitcase, the navy blue dress, a fresh blouse, a pair of comfortable shoes, and my favorite pearl necklace. Felicity had gifted it to me on my 70th birthday. I tucked the pearls into a velvet pouch and held them close, feeling a wave of warmth and grief wash over me. That evening, after Beatrice arrived to watch the grandchildren, I walked the half-mile into the village center. The cobblestone streets were lit by the glow of vintage lampposts, and the air was tinged with the scent of blooming lilacs. I entered the little shop, Willowbrook Drapery, and was greeted by Mrs. Shelley, who had presided over the store for as long as I could remember. "Hortense, dear, is that you?" Mrs. Shelley's eyes widened, and she hurried from behind the counter. "Good evening, Evelyn. Do you have something suitable for a funeral? A shawl, perhaps?" I smiled wanly, brushing back a stray lock of hair. Of course. Let's see." She led me to a rack near the window, where a simple black silk shawl hung. "This just came in, soft and not too heavy." I draped the shawl over my shoulders and examined myself in the mirror. The silk glimmered dully in the lamplight. "Perfect. Evelyn, I'll take it." "You look tired, dear. Are you all right?" Her brow furrowed with concern. I hesitated before speaking. I hadn't intended to share my family's tragedy with the entire village, but Evelyn had been a friend through so many seasons of my life. "My sister-in-law Felicity passed away this morning. I've got to travel to Oxford for the funeral, It's all so sudden. Evelyn's face fell. Oh, Hortense, I'm so sorry. I remember how fond you were of her. Let me know if there's anything I can do. I nodded gratefully. Thank you. That means a lot. I paid for the shawl and stepped back into the quiet night, clutching my bag to my side. The village seemed to hold its breath, as though mourning with me. Upon returning home, I found Beatrice in the living room, gently rocking Max in her arms while Jade lay asleep on the sofa. I thanked her and took the children, tucking them into their small beds. They both stirred, blinking sleep from their eyes, but upon seeing me, they smiled, and I felt tears sting behind my lids. I pressed a kiss to each of their foreheads, whispering good night. I sat at my writing desk afterward and penned a letter to my daughter. I wanted her to know that I was coming to Oxford, that her mother's heart ached, but I would see her and stand together through this. I sealed the letter and set it aside, knowing she would read it first thing in the morning. The next day dawned gray and drizzly, as if the sky itself mourned Felicity's passing. I rose early and dressed in the navy blue dress, the pearls resting against my chest under a simple white blouse. I wrapped the black shawl around my shoulders and carried my small suitcase. Beatrice's car was waiting to take me to the train station, and we set off just after 8 o'clock. At the station, I purchased a second-class ticket to Oxford, the conductor stamping it with a crisp punch that felt heavier than it should. Beatrice pressed my hands, her eyes moist. Be safe, Hortense. Call me when you arrive. I will, dear. Thank you. And with that, I boarded the train, finding a window seat where I could watch the rolling fields of Wiltshire drift by. The rhythmic chug of the engine lulled me into reflection, and I thought of Arthur's gentle smile, Felicity's hearty laugh, and the happy days we'd shared. I felt a pang of loneliness so sharp it took my breath away. 2 hours later, I arrived in Oxford. The station was bustling with commuters and tourists, a far cry from the peaceful lanes of Willowbrook. I wheeled my suitcase through the crowds, following the directions Felicity had given me, a short taxi ride to 47 Barryknoll Road, where the Morton family had lived for decades. The taxi driver, a young man named Sam, dropped me off and asked if I needed help. I paid him and stepped onto the sidewalk, uncertain of how I'd face the Morton household. The Morton house was imposing, a red brick 3-story Victorian with climbing ivy and shuttered windows. I hesitated at the gate before ringing the bell. Moments later, the door swung open, revealing my niece, Margaret. She was tall, with Felicity's wavy brown hair, but her eyes were red-rimmed, and her face was drawn with grief. Aunt Tess, thank you for coming, she said, pulling me into a gentle embrace. Margaret, my dear? I stroked her hair as she guided me inside. The house was filled with the scent of lilies and wet earth, a memorial tribute set up by friends. Portraits of Felicity lined the hallway, her smiling face at various ages, from a lithe young bride to the vibrant woman she'd been just a month ago. Come through, Margaret whispered, leading me to the sitting room. Furniture was arranged in a semicircle, where family members were gathered. My brother-in-law, Simon Morton, sat in a leather armchair, his head bowed. His wife, Beatrice, sat beside him. Their sons, Thomas and Alfred, hovered near the window. At least 30 others crowded the room. Cousins, childhood friends, neighbors. Aunt Tess, Thomas said quietly, stepping forward. He offered his hand, which I shook, feeling the strength of his youth. I'm glad you're here. I managed a small smile. Thank you, dear. Alfred gave me a solemn nod, and I turned towards the center of the room where a portrait of Felicity hung above a mantel. The painting was recent. Felicity had sat for it just before her illness worsened. Her eyes in the portrait seemed to follow, me, full of compassion. "We've reserved a pew at St. Mary's Church," Margaret said, her voice catching. "Mum insisted you sit beside her." "I'd like that," I whispered. I looked around and noticed Morgana standing alone by the fireplace. Her lips were pressed into a thin line, and her arms were crossed. She stared at me with a mix of disdain and something unreadable, like a cat sizing up a mouse. I felt a tremor of anger, but I quelled it. Now was not the time for confrontation. I was here for Felicity, for the sanctity of her memory. I took a seat next to Margaret, and we sat in silence, listening to the soft murmurs of family members paying their respects. When the funeral service began that afternoon, I entered the church wearing a black hat with a modest veil, the pearls shimmering at my throat. The church was solemn, bathed in the muted light of stained glass windows. I followed the procession of flower-laden casket down the aisle, my heart pounding so loudly I feared it would echo in my ears. At the front, the vicar spoke in soft tones about Felicity's kindness, her devotion to her family, and her tireless charity work. As the choir sang one of Felicity's favorite hymns, Amazing Grace, I found myself overcome by grief so intense that tears blurred my vision. I gripped the armrest of the pew, clutching the pearls as though they were a lifeline. Then I heard a whisper at my shoulder. "How heartless of you to come." I froze, recognizing Morgana's voice. My pulse thundered. I turned to her slowly, my breath catching. "Heartless? Excuse me?" The words slipped out in a whisper, laced with hurt. Morgana's eyes flicked to the casket, then back to me. "You really thought you'd honor Felicity? After all these years, you just decided to show up? No one was surprised when we thought you'd skip." I felt a flash of indignation. This was my sister-in-law's final gift to me, the betrayal of insinuations. Felicity was more than that to me. She was my friend, my family. Don't you dare question my love for her. Morgana's lips curled into a bitter smile. "Save it for the eulogy, Tess." She turned away, leaving me seething. I forced my focus back to the front as the vicar concluded the ceremony. When the time came to process out to the cemetery, I followed behind the coffin, keeping my gaze forward. The sky threatened to break loose with rain, and clouds gathered ominously overhead. At the graveside, the preacher offered a prayer, and then family members were invited to place a rose on the casket. I approached, kneeling as I laid a single, white rose atop the polished wood. My tears fell freely now as I whispered, "Goodbye, my dear friend. Thank you for everything." I stood, wiping my cheeks, and noticed Morgana turn away before the casket was lowered. Her back was rigid, her chin raised. I wondered at her cruelty. How could she show such disdain on a day of mourning? Yet I held on to my composure, knowing that Felicity would have wanted peace. After the burial, we gathered in the church hall, where a modest spread of sandwiches, cakes, and tea had been arranged. I took a cup of tea and a small plate of cucumber sandwiches, then made my way to a small table set aside for immediate family. Margaret sat beside me, her hand in mine. Thomas and Alfred hovered, their faces solemn. Simon and Beatrice sat across, from us, arms around each other. I lifted my teacup, longing to taste its warmth, but the first sip burned as tears welled in my eyes again. Margaret squeezed my hand. "I saw Morgana speaking to Colin earlier. I think she's causing trouble." I frowned. "What did she say?" Margaret took a breath. "Apparently she's been telling everyone that you abandoned Felicity, that you refused to come because you thought you were too high and mighty." My knuckles whitened around my teacup. She lied. I know. Margaret's eyes shone, with anger and sorrow. I confronted her, but she just walked away. "I'm so sorry you had to hear that." Simon joined us then, his face grim. "Colin believes her. He's upset with you, Hortense. He said you never sent your condolences, never reached out until today. My heart splintered. Colin had been like a son to me, always courteous, respectful. I'd written to him weeks ago, asking about his work and sending my love, but I hadn't mentioned the funeral because I genuinely didn't know. Morgana had orchestrated this lie so expertly that even the most vigilant could be deceived. I stood abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. Conversations hushed as all eyes turned to me. Colin is welcome to speak to me now. My voice, though quiet, cut through the room like a blade. I did nothing but love your sister. If anyone has lied, it's Morgana. I came as soon as I knew. I honored her memory. If Colin cannot see that, then he is free to leave. A stunned silence followed. Margaret rose and embraced me. Thank you, Aunt Tess. Before I could say more, the church hall doors opened and Colin entered. He looked angry, but also torn, as though his heart was warring against Morgana's lies. Our eyes met, and I saw confusion flicker across his face. Mum! Isabella's voice from the doorway made my blood run cold. My daughter had arrived. I hadn't expected her until tomorrow, but she'd managed to rearrange her work. I met Isabella's gaze, and in that moment, everything hung suspended. The lies Morgana had spread, the tears Felicity's family shed, the anger of my son-in-law, and the love I bore for all of them. I took a breath, determined to set the record straight once and for all. Isabella. I began, my voice thick with emotion. But before I could continue, a sudden crack of thunder rattled the windows of the hall, and the lights flickered, plunging us into a silence so intense it felt as though the world had stopped. Rain began to patter against the roof, and outside, I glimpsed dark clouds swirling like ghosts. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. But before I could continue, a sudden crack of thunder rattled the windows of the hall, and the lights flickered, plunging us into an eerie half-light. For a moment, time seemed suspended, my heart thudding so loudly I was certain everyone could hear it. Outside, the rain began to hammer the roof, a relentless drumming that echoed the turmoil inside me. A hush fell over the assembled mourners as they exchanged uneasy glances. I pressed a trembling hand to the carved oak table at my side, steadying myself. The flickering light cast wavering shadows across the feminine faces of my children. My family. Isabella's wide eyes filled with concern. Colin's jaw clenched, a question lingering on his lips. My breath came in short bursts as I gathered my thoughts, searching for the words that would dispel Morgana's poisonous lies once and for all. I'm so sorry, I said, my voice barely above a whisper but reverberating in the silence. I didn't mean to disrupt the service, but I couldn't let those falsehoods stand. The thunder rolled again, and a sudden gust of wind rattled the French windows, sending a shiver down my spine. Isabella crossed the room and took my hand, her grip warm and steady. Mum, maybe we should step outside, she murmured, nodding toward the doorway leading into the hall's small vestibule. The storm's getting worse, and I don't want things to get any more chaotic in here. I nodded, looking to Colin. His expression was conflicted, anger and confusion warring with loyalty. Colin, I began, my voice faltering for a moment as I tried to read his eyes. I need you to understand. He shot an injured glance at me, the muscles around his mouth taut. Not now, Hortense, he said in a low tone, brushing past me. Right now, I have to deal with my sister. His dismissal stung, but I nodded, knowing better than to argue in front of so many grieving eyes. I offered Isabella a sad smile and followed her toward the vestibule, where the carpet muffled our footsteps. Margaret was already there, gripping the windowsill as the rain pelted the glass in fat droplets. The leaves from the oak tree are blowing into the hall, she said, her voice tight. We'll need to close the windows. The storm will get in the way of the reception. I helped her push the shutters closed, and the room fell into a muted dimness, broken only by the sporadic glow of the antique wall sconces. We drew deep breaths, letting the relative quiet settle our nerves. The muffled murmur of voices from inside sounded almost distant now. "Mum," Isabella said softly, brushing a pale strand of hair behind my ear. "Yes, dear?" "Colin looks hurt?" He believed what Morgana said. Her voice trembled, and I felt a fresh pang of guilt. Morgan's lies had caused a rift that flickered through the room like the tempest outside. He's upset because he loves you and trusts his sister. But I swear to you, Isabella, I never wanted to hurt him. I wrote to him weeks ago, but Morgana intercepted my letters. Isabella's eyes widened. Intercepted? But... She took them from the post before he saw them. She left him messages of her own making, saying I ignored the whole family. These lies? I shook my head. I couldn't have known. I would have been here immediately. Isabella's expression softened. She took both of my hands in hers. We'll fix this, Mum. We'll make sure Colin knows the truth. I exhaled, grateful for her unwavering support. Thank you, my love. As we walked back inside, a sudden flash of lightning illuminated the hall through the small window above the door. I could see Morgana's profile, her arms folded, mouth twisted in a disdainful smirk as she whispered something to Colin. The sight gave me new impetus. I would confront Morgana, not here in a room full of mourners, but somewhere private where I could crumple her facade and force her to answer for the harm she had caused. At that moment, the minister's voice called from beyond a half-open door. Family, if you would gather. My heart sank as I realized that the reception was about to begin, and I would have to navigate the minefield of condolences, forced smiles, and veiled stares, even as Morgana whispered poison in my loved one's ears. I took a steadying breath and stepped into the hall. The gathering had shifted into hushed conversation, friends of Felicity's sharing memories in low tones. I caught sight of Simon deep in discussion with a neighbor, his face etched with sorrow. Beatrice hovered nearby, offering soda and cold, compressed towels to guests who looked faint. I made my way to the table where the family sat. Margaret patted the seat beside her, and I slid in, careful not to disturb anyone. Thomas and Alfred hovered respectfully, while Beatrice sat to my right, offering a warm smile that made me feel momentarily grounded. Hortense, Simon said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. I'm so grateful you made it. Felicity always spoke so highly of you, and I of her, I replied, forcing a gentle smile. She was the dearest friend I ever had. He nodded, his eyes glistening. I wish there had been more time, more days with her. I reached across the table, placing my hand atop his. All the more reason to honor her memory by telling the truth. She wouldn't have wanted discord. Before he could respond, Morgana swept in, flanked by two of her closest allies, a distant cousin of Arthur's and a colleague from her charitable board. Her lips were painted a stark crimson that did little to conceal the malice in her gaze. Simon, she said breezily, ignoring me entirely. I was just telling Helen and Joseph about Aunt Felicity's latest donation to the hospital. Such a generous woman, wasn't she? Beatrice interjected. Indeed, we're all planning to continue her work. Morgana smiled at me, a thin, condescending tilt. Hortense, dear, how good of you to join us. I was worried you might decide to skip again. I felt a swirl of anger and sadness, the sting of her words sharper than any physical blow. But I refused to rise to her bait. Instead, I addressed the family in general tone. The weather is dreadful, isn't it? I hope everyone is all right, she arched an eyebrow. Yes, quite dreary. But let me pour you some tea. It might help. Morgana began to fill a porcelain teacup, her gloved fingers brushing the china. The steam curled upward and I watched her for a moment, searching for any flicker of remorse. There was none. "Thank you," I said quietly, accepting the teacup. The liquid was hot and bitter, an apt metaphor, I thought, for my own feelings. I took a measured sip, then set the cup on the table. Beatrice leaned in, whispering into my ear. "After this, come upstairs. I've prepared some tea in my room, and we can talk in private." I nodded, grateful for an ally in this house freighted with grief and gossip. Just then, Colin stepped into view, crossing the room in long strides. He approached our table, face flushed with emotion. I rose to meet him, meeting his eyes directly. "Hortense," he said, his voice rough. "We need to speak, privately." I cupped his hand in mine. "Of course." He glanced over his shoulder, wary of Morgana's ever-watchful gaze, then guided me through the archway leading to a narrow corridor. The house felt like a labyrinth. In the dim light, the polished wooden floors echoing with each of our footfalls. He opened a heavy door and ushered me inside what must have been a small library. Rows of leather-bound volumes lined the walls, and a single window provided a view of the torrential rain. He closed the door behind us and leaned against it, his arms folded. "You have 30 seconds, he said, his tone tense. I inhaled, steadying myself. "Colin," I began, my voice soft but resolute. "Morgana lied. She intercepted my letters. I didn't hear of Felicity's passing until yesterday. I left Willowbrook as soon as I could." His eyes flickered with doubt. "Then why? Didn't you call the funeral home yourself? I heard she wanted you to speak at the service." I took a step closer, holding his gaze. "I did. I called the home, got the details. I'm here now, aren't I? I came because I loved her, because I loved you, and Isabella, and Jade, and Max." He hesitated, as though torn between relief and anger. Finally, he let out a breath. "I want to believe you, but Morgana is a master at deception." "Then look at the letters I wrote," I said, pulling a small envelope from my purse. "Initially, I sent them to you. She took them. Then I came here with my own eyes. If you won't believe my words, believe this." He took the envelope, weighed it in his hand. I could see the conflict warring in his eyes. "I'll read them." I nodded, my heart hammering. "Please. And then, let's find a way to keep Morgana from hurting anyone else." He swallowed, looking at the sealed envelope as though it were a lifeline. After a moment, he nodded slowly. "Give me some time," he said. "I need to see what those letters say." "Of course," I replied, stepping back to give him space. He turned and left the room, leaving me alone among the silent books. I sank into a cushioned armchair, heart pounding, and placed my hand over my chest. The storm rattled the window panes, and I closed my eyes, trying to calm the whirlwind of emotions swirling within me. Minutes passed before the door creaked open, and Beatrice slipped inside, closing the door gently behind her. "How are you, my love?" she asked, crossing the room and perching on the arm of the chair. "Fearful," I confessed. "Not afraid of the storm outside, but afraid of losing my family to Morgana's machinations." Beatrice reached out and clasped my hand. "You've already done so much. You've come all this way on little notice, faced her head-on in front of everyone. That takes more courage than most." "I just want peace," I said, tears pooling in my eyes. "I don't want this darkness to overshadow Felicity's memory." Beatrice smiled, brushing a stray lock of hair from my face. "You won't let it, dear. You have love on your side and the truth. Morgana has cunning, but truth and love are far more powerful." Just then, a sudden crash of thunder shook the window, and the lights flickered again, as if echoing the turmoil in my mind. "Should go down," Beatrice said, standing. "Thomas and Alfred will want to speak with you." I rose and smoothed my dress. "Very well." Together we left the room and descended the stairs. The reception hall was quieter now. Many guests had departed, seeking shelter from the storm. Only a few remained, neighbors holding umbrellas by the doorway, exchanging condolences. Isabella caught my eye and offered a wan smile. "How are you, Nan?" she asked as we approached. "Trying to be strong," I admitted, leaning down to kiss her cheek. "Good." She glanced toward Morgana, who stood by the refreshment table pouring coffee with exaggerated grace. "I think I'll take Jade and Max to the car. They're tired and worried about the thunder." I nodded, watching as she scooped up Jade and then tucked Max under her arm. They tiptoed past Morgana without a backward glance and hurried toward the front door? "Excuse me," Margaret said, guiding me toward a small cluster of chairs near the window. Thomas and Alfred wanted to say a word. I sat, and they took seats on either side of me. Thomas, the elder at 25, tall and solemn. Alfred, 22, more introspective. Their faces bore the same determined expression as my own, as though we were united in our resolve to protect Felicity's legacy. "Aunt Tess," Thomas began, his voice careful. "We know Morgana tries to control everything. She's always been jealous of you and Mother's close bond. She wanted Mother's inheritance," Alfred added. "Now that she's gone, she's manipulating people to gain the upper hand. She got Father to sign certain business interests in her favor." I closed my eyes, the weight of their words settling on me like a heavy cloak. "We've found some documents," Thomas said, pulling a folded sheaf of papers from his jacket pocket. "Codicils to Mother's will. She intended to leave the family home to us, but Morgana pressed Father to alter it, leaving her in control of the property. We're not letting that stand," Alfred said, voice firm. "We've spoken with the solicitor, and provided we can prove undue influence, we can challenge the change." I opened my eyes, looking at them both. My grandchildren, determined to defend their mother's memory and protect the family home. The pride in my chest warmed me, surging through the gloom of the funeral. "You're both so brave," I whispered, squeezing their hands. "We learned from the best," Thomas said with a small smile. "Mother always said you were strong enough to move mountains." My breath caught in my throat. "Your mother was exceptional. We'll make sure her wishes are honored." Suddenly, Morgana's voice floated through the hall, calling for Father, her tone sweet as poison. "Simon, darling, where are you? We're ready to leave." "I'll handle her," I said to Thomas and Alfred. "Stay here with Mother's papers. Make sure no one takes them." They nodded, resolute. I rose and walked toward the front of the hall. The storm outside had redoubled, rain streaming down the windows in torrents. Across the room, Morgana stood over Simon, her hand on his arm, tears glistening in her eyes as though she mourned deeply. My heart twisted at her theatrics, but I steeled myself. "Simon," I said, stepping forward. Morgana turned, her eyes narrowing. "Hortense," Simon said, turning his gaze to me, blocked by Morgana's taut form. "You need to come with me," I said, my voice gentle but unwavering. "Now?" he asked, confusion flitting across his face. "Yes. I want you to meet the solicitor tomorrow morning. We have documents to sign." "But the funeral reception—" "Felicity wouldn't want us lingering here while her home is being stolen." I caught Morgana's furious glance. "Please." Simon hesitated, glancing at Morgana, who feigned concern. "Simon, dear," she cooed, stepping forward. "Why are you leaving? It's raining. Your wife and children are waiting in the car." "Colin will bring them in," I said firmly. "Simon, please come. This is important." He looked at me, torn between her coaxing and my plea. Finally, he nodded. "All right." "Thank you," I said softly. I guided him toward the door, keeping a hand on his elbow. Morgana followed, calling after us in an exaggerated tone. "Simon, darling, you're not going anywhere without me, are you?" I turned, meeting her gaze without flinching. "Simon will come with me." Her lips curved into a derisive smile. "You've Already proven the solicitor will find no evidence of foul play, she said in a low tone that only I could hear. We shall see. With that, Simon and I left the hall. Outside, the storm raged relentlessly, wind tearing at my shawl. I guided him toward the car while he fumbled with his umbrella. Hortense, he said as I helped him into the passenger seat, I still don't understand fully what's happening. Morgana manipulated your father late in his illness, I explained, brushing a wet strand of hair from his forehead. She convinced him to adjust Mother's will to favor her. But we have the earlier codicils. Her influence will be exposed. He exhaled, sinking into the seat. I had no idea. I thought I was at peace. I know, dear, but it's not too late. He closed his eyes, exhaustion and grief etched into his features. Thank you for being here, Tess. I squeezed his hand. Always. The ride back to the hotel where he and the rest of the family were staying was a blur of darkness, punctuated by the flash of lightning. I sat quietly as he recounted fragmented memories of his final days with Felicity, each memory a small dagger to my heart. At the hotel, I helped him to a suite where Colin and Isabella awaited. Their faces lit up with relief when they saw Simon. The children clung to him, and I saw Colin's eyes softened as he realized the truth. Mom, Isabella said, rushing to me. She lied, I whispered. Colin pulled me into a tight embrace. I'm sorry, he murmured into my hair. I doubted you. I see now I was wrong. Tears flowed down my cheeks, but they were tears of relief, not sorrow. Let's make sure Mama Felicity's wishes are honored, Isabella said, gesturing to Simon, who sank onto the sofa, drained. For a moment, we stood together, the four of us. A family once fractured by lies, now united by truth. The storm outside gradually began to abate, the thunder rolling off into distant rumbles. That night, as I lay in the queen-sized bed in the hotel, sweet, unable to sleep, I reflected on the day's events. Felicity's service, Morgana's poisonous rumors, the confrontation with Simon, and Colin's reluctant forgiveness. Beneath the grief and anger, I felt a sense of hope stirring. Tomorrow, we would face Morgana once more, in the solicitor's office, and rectify the wrongs done to Felicity's legacy. But for now, I drifted into a restless sleep, the faint sound of rain still tapping against the window, promising dawn beyond the storm. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, a stark contrast to the tempestuous grief of yesterday. As I sat on the edge of the bed, the pale light of early dawn filtered through the curtains, casting a soft glow across the room. The previous night's storm had washed away the dark clouds, leaving behind a tranquil sky that offered a sense of renewal. Yet in my chest, the weight of anticipation pressed heavily. Today, we would confront Morgana in the solicitor's office and seek justice for Felicity's memory. I rose quietly, careful not to disturb Simon, who still slept soundly, exhausted from the emotional turmoil of the funeral day. The hotel room was warm, a small electric radiator humming murmurs of comfort. I pressed my hand to the chilly window pane, examining the manicured courtyard below, where dew clung to the hedges like diamonds. I dressed in the navy blue dress I'd worn yesterday, the black shawl neatly folded at the foot of the bed. The silk fabric felt substantial, a reminder of how far I'd traveled in the last 24 hours. I brushed my silver hair into a loose chignon, securing it with a slender comb, then tucked the velvet pouch containing Felicity's pearls into the pocket of my dress. The pearls lay against my thigh, a silent source of comfort and resolve. Joined Isabella, Colin, and the children in the breakfast nook adjoining the suite. A small table was set with finger sandwiches, scones, and tea, a modest spread, hastily arranged by the hotel to accommodate their morning guests. Jade and Max sat at one end, sipping strawberry milk and chattering about the hotel's breakfast pastries. Their innocence lifted my spirits. I smiled as Max attempted to pinch a blueberry from his muffin, only to have it roll off the plate onto the tablecloth. "Good morning, Nan," Jade said, her eyes bright. "Will you be coming back tonight?" I leaned over and kissed her forehead. "If all goes well with Aunt Margaret's solicitor, I'll be home tomorrow evening. Your mother will let you know." Max, oblivious to the room's tension, offered me the very blueberry he'd been trying to eat. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said, accepting it with a grin. Colin, seated beside Isabella, brushed a hand through his hair, his eyes shadowed with worry. "I'm sorry this is happening," he said, voice low. I took his hand across the table. "You have nothing to apologize for, dear. Morgana orchestrated all of this. You did what you thought was right, just like I did." Isabella reached across and patted my arm. "We'll fix it today. I know it." I nodded, drawing strength from their solidarity. The clock ticked ominously as we finished breakfast. At 9 o'clock, we gathered our things and made our way to the solicitor's office, a stately Georgian townhouse just a few blocks from the hotel. The black door bore a bronze plaque reading Morton and Osborne, Solicitors at Law. I took a cleansing breath at the threshold, recalling the first time Felicity had brought me here to discuss her charitable trust. She'd glowed with purpose, certain that her philanthropic endeavors would outlive her. A smartly dressed receptionist guided us to a wood-paneled meeting room on the second floor. The walls were lined with shelves of legal tomes, and an imposing walnut desk stood near the window. Behind it sat a tall man in his 50s, sharp navy suit, stern but compassionate expression, whom I recognized as Mr. Harold Osborne, the partner who had overseen Felicity's will. Beside him was a junior solicitor, a young woman with keen eyes and a polite demeanor. "Mrs. Fairchild," Mr. Osborne said as we took seats around the polished table. He offered a firm handshake. "I'm so sorry for your loss." "Thank you," I replied, smoothing the silken skirt of my dress. "And thank you for seeing us on such short notice." "Of course. Mr. Morton requested that we expedite this meeting. You understand why?" I exchanged a glance with Simon, who nodded. "Yes." Morgana contested the codicil to my sister-in-law's will, claiming undue influence. "But we have evidence." Mr. Osborne's gaze shifted to my grandchildren, who sat at my side, Thomas clasping a folder of documents, Alfred standing behind him, his arms folded. He inclined his head, acknowledging them. "Excellent. If you would present your evidence, I'll review it and advise on the next steps." Thomas slid the folder across the table. "Here is the original will and codicil, signed by Mother in her own hand, witnessed by a solicitor in 2023. And here are the documents Morgana presented to Father in 2024, purporting to modify those terms." I watched Simon's face as Thomas spoke, a mix of grief and betrayal etched into his features. He rose to stand behind his sons, proud despite his pain. I placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. Mr. Osborne leafed through the pages, his expression growing grave. "This handwriting is unquestionably Felicity's," he said, tapping on the signature, "and this amendment clearly contradicts her stated intentions. My colleague will verify whether the proper formalities were observed, whether there was any sign of coercion." As the junior solicitor reviewed the paperwork, Morgana's presence suddenly filled the doorway. She stood there, arms crossed, lips set in an imperious line. "Harold, dear, I trust everything is proceeding smoothly." Her tone was sweet, but the room's tension cracked at her intrusion like glass. Mr. Osborne glanced toward her. "Mrs. Fairchild and her family have presented evidence of a valid codicil. We need to verify whether the subsequent amendment was made voluntarily." She laughed softly. "Voluntary?" My brother was on his deathbed. He understood precisely what he was doing. Simon's eyes flashed. Father was not of sound mind. He was ill and weak. I never pressured him to sign anything. "How touching," Morgana said, stepping into the room. "But truly, I think, perhaps you're all blinded by grief. This is simply an unfortunate misunderstanding." Thomas stood, anger flaring. "A misunderstanding? You lied to get him to sign. You told him the codicil had to be changed for Mother's estate to pay off her debts. There were no debts, Morgana's eyes sparking. You think I'd stoop to that? Preposterous. Alfred stepped forward, placing a hand on Thomas's arm. Don't waste your breath, Morgana. We have witnesses. Morgana's mouth twisted. Witnesses? Who? Your grandmother. She's not even here. I took a step forward, voice steady. My letters, which were intercepted and never reached my family, serve as evidence. Concord Post Office lost them initially. Morgana retrieved them, unsolicited, and destroyed Marie's final instructions. Her face paled, but she masked it with a brittle smile. And you're blaming me for that? The post office was not under my control? I held her gaze unflinchingly. But you're the one with the letters in your possession, aren't you? All attempts to contact your niece and nephew. All correspondence. Gone. Mr. Osborne's assistant returned at that moment, handing him a sealed envelope. Mr. Osborne, these are the results of the handwriting analysis. He opened it and read in silence, then looked up. The analysis confirms the codicil was signed under duress. It was witnessed by a solicitor. But evidence suggests father was not fully lucid. The signatures on the 2024 amendment bear slight irregularities that indicate possible forgery. Morgana's composure cracked. Her mascara-streaked cheeks gave away her anger. Forgery? That's preposterous. I would never forge my own brother's signature. We also spoke with a nurse who cared for Mr. Morton in his final days, Mr. Osborne continued. She stated he was heavily medicated with morphine and barely coherent. The room fell silent. Morgana's knuckles whitened as she gripped the fabric of her skirt. Look at me, she finally said, voice trembling. I have always loved this family. Yes, I questioned Mother's choices, but I never intended harm. Intent is irrelevant, Simon said, stepping forward. You took advantage of Father when he was at his weakest. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it without a sound. Her eyes flicked to me, brimming with fury and regret. But no words formed. Mr. Osborne cleared his throat. Mrs. Fairchild, it appears the original will and codicil will be upheld. Morgana, you are required to restore your interest in the estate to the recipients named in the 2023 codicil. Any proceeds derived from the 2024 amendment must be returned to the estate. We will handle the necessary paperwork to finalize this matter. Morgana's face drained of color. You can't do this to me, she hissed, backing away. I will not be shamed by immoral lies. The evidence speaks for itself, Mr. Osborne said, his tone firm. We have a moral and legal obligation to uphold Felicity Morton's wishes. Morgana's fury finally gave way to panic. She grasped the doorframe and darted out, slamming the office door behind her. A stunned silence settled over the room. Simon sank into a chair, head in his hands. I can't believe she was capable of this, he murmured, voice thick with shame. I took his hand, squeezing it gently. None of this is your fault, I said. Isabella slid into a chair beside me, placing her hand on my shoulder. I'm just so glad it's over. Thomas and Alfred exhaled at the same moment, a shared expression of relief passing between them. Mother would be proud, Thomas said, wiping his brow. Yes, I agreed, tears of both sorrow and triumph pricking my eyes. After we left the solicitor's office, the family lingered outside, the late morning sun warming the pavement. Birds chirped in the trees, and the London noise felt distant, almost muffled. We assembled in a loose circle, each drawing comfort from one another's presence. What next? Simon asked, voice weary. We return to Oxford and bring Mother's vision to life, I said, glancing at Isabella, who nodded. Felicity wanted the Westgate Children's Hospital to receive funding from her estate, she said. We can finalize that this week. And the family home? Simon asked, sighing. That belongs to you and your sons, I said, catching his eye. You can decide whether to keep it or sell it. But it is yours, free from Morgana's taint. I think I'd like to keep it, he said, voice soft. Too many memories. But I can't do it alone. Then let us help, Isabella said. This is our mother's legacy, and we're part of that story. Tears glistened in Simon's eyes. He reached out and took Isabella's hand. Thank you. The morning unfolded into plans for memorial services to benefit the hospital, charitable, drives in Felicity's name, and the restoration of the family home's rose garden. Over the next 2 days, we worked together, drafting letters to the hospital board, coordinating a fundraising gala, and meeting with local gardening enthusiasts to resurrect the rose beds that had once overflowed with color. Moments of levity emerged. Jade and Max joined me in planting new rose bushes, their laughter as we muddied our hands with soil. Isabella and Colin organized a small memorial slideshow, assembling photographs of Felicity's happiest moments. Simon and his sons restored the wooden frames of the family portraits, sanding and polishing until the images gleamed. Through these acts of creation and remembrance, Felicity's spirit seemed to seep back into our lives, bringing warmth to the cold shadows left by Morgana's deceit. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped low behind the rooftops, casting a golden glow over the courtyard of the Morton house, I stood at the window and reflected on how much had changed in a matter of days. The storm of lies had erupted, dark and furious, yet the calm that followed was clearer, purer. I felt Felicity's presence above me, light and guiding. Isabella joined me at the window, Jade in her arms, Max trundling close behind. Nan, Isabella said softly, Mother would be so proud of you. I looked at her, drawing strength from the resemblance she bore to her grandmother. And I'm proud of you, I replied. She smiled, resting her head on my shoulder. We gazed together at the courtyard, where new rosebuds peeked through the earth. The air was fragrant with promise. I felt his storm behind me, but now I faced a horizon bright with purpose. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications. The morning after our meeting with Mr. Osborne dawned with a hushed reverence, as if Oxford itself held its breath in solidarity. I rose before the first light, the steam from my tea curling in the cold pre-dawn air. Across the courtyard, the Morton house stood in dignified silence, its windows darkened, the rose garden blooming in quiet defiance of grief. I sat by the window, watching the sky transition from ink to coral, heart both heavy and light. Felicity's wishes had been honored, her legacy secured, yet a restlessness stirred within me. Though Morgana's deceit had been laid bare, there remained fractures to mend, emotional wounds among those I held most dear, and the delicate task of returning our lives to some semblance of normalcy. I donned a soft cardigan over my silk blouse, the fabric still smelling faintly of yesterday's rain. I smoothed my skirt, careful to avoid the creases that had plagued me in youth, and considered the day's events. Isabella and Colin had insisted I stay in Oxford for 1 more night, to rest and gather my thoughts before the long journey back to Willowbrook. They were right. The journey to heal would be longer than the journey home. I sighed, thinking of Jade and Max. They would miss me, but at least they were safe with Isabella's in-laws. Stepping into the hallway, I paused before the portrait of Felicity that hung above the mantel. I placed my hand on the frame, tracing the painted curve of her lips. I could almost hear her gentle laugh. "Good morning, Aunt Tess," came a soft voice from the doorway. I turned to see Margaret, dressed in a simple black dress, her hair neatly pinned back. Her face had warmed since the day of the funeral, the lines of grief softened by shared purpose. "Margaret, dear, you're up early." "I couldn't sleep much," she admitted, stepping closer. "I wanted to thank you again for all you've done. I know Mother would be grateful." I smiled, feeling a lump in my throat. She would. And you and your brothers made her brave, just as she made you brave. She nodded, eyes glistening. "What are your plans for today?" I thought I might walk through the old garden, I said, glancing toward the window. I want to see how the new roses fare in the morning light. Her face brightened. I'd love to join you. After that, I need to meet with the hospital administrator to finalize the donation paperwork. If you'd like, you can come with me. I hesitated, uncertainty fluttering in my chest. I'm not sure if I should. Margaret placed a hand on my arm. I want you there, Aunt Tess. Under the circumstances, it's right you see everything through to completion. Her resolve gave me courage, and I nodded. Together, we made our way downstairs. The hallway was still shadowed, the wooden floors creaking beneath our footsteps. We emerged into the courtyard where the rose bushes stood in neat rows, their petals aflame with color. The morning dew glistened like diamonds on the leaves. I knelt beside one particularly vibrant bloom, crimson petals unfurling like the wings of a phoenix. She adored these roses, Margaret said quietly, joining me at my side. Every spring she would plant a new variety. She said each rose told a story. I inhaled the perfumed air, memories flooding back. Yes, she did. She'd tell me about the language of flowers, love, courage, remembrance. She nodded, picking a single petal that had fallen from a bush. We're going to replant the entire west border with her favorite David Austin varieties. Thomas and Alfred will oversee it. I'd like to help, I said, extending my gloved hand toward her. Margaret smiled, slipping her hand into mine. We'd be honored. We lingered among the roses, each bloom a testament to Felicity's love and resilience. Yet a shadow of unease lingered beneath my gratitude. Morgana's deception had bared our weaknesses, revealing how easily trust could be manipulated. I'd believed my family was my anchor. Now, I wondered how many other falsehoods lay hidden beneath the veneer of civility. After a time, we departed the garden and made our way to the hospital to meet with the administrator, Dr. Hargreaves. The corridor leading to his office was bright with morning light, the walls adorned with photographs of smiling children and nurses. We paused in front of a mural depicting a teacher reading to her students, a reminder of the hope Felicity had sought to foster through her charity. Dr. Hargreaves greeted us with a warm handshake, his graying temples and gentle eyes bespeaking decades of tireless service. He guided us into his corner office, where stacks of patient files and acceptance letters cluttered the desk. Mrs. Fairchild, thank you for coming. He gestured toward a chair. Thank you for meeting us. I replied, sinking into the seat. Your sister-in-law's contribution will be transformative, he said with fervor. We will establish the Morton Pediatric Wing in her honor. It will provide specialized care for children with rare forms of lymphoma. Something dear to my heart. I felt a lump in my throat. Felicity loved children, I said, voice trembling. She would be so honored. He nodded, pressing a manila folder into my hands. These are the project plans and budget. With your approval, we will begin work next month. Margaret and I reviewed the documents, noting details of the wing's design, the number of beds, the specialized equipment. We signed the necessary forms, each signature a solemn promise to uphold Felicity's legacy. Thank you, Dr. Hargreaves said, standing. When the wing opens, we will host a dedication ceremony in your sister's name. Friends, family, and the community will gather to celebrate her generosity. We will be there, I said softly, envisaging the moment when the ribbon would be cut, unveiling the wing that would offer hope to countless families. We departed the hospital and returned to the Morton house by midday. Lunch was a quiet affair. Scones, fruit tarts, and tea served in Felicity's delicate china. The table was set in the sunlit dining room, where golden tulips in a vase reflected the promise of spring. Isabella joined us, her presence a balm. To my heart. I poured her a cup of tea. How are you feeling? I asked. She took a sip, her gaze thoughtful. Better. Knowing the truth, seeing father stand up to Morgana's schemes, It helped. But there's still a wound there, isn't there? I nodded, understanding her sentiment. Yes, the betrayal cut deep. But we have each other, and we have Felicity's memory as our guide. She rested her hand on mine. Thank you for everything, Mum. Always, I replied, squeezing her hand. After lunch, I retreated to the library to gather my things. Packing would require focus. My trip back to Willowbrook awaited me tomorrow. I slid my hand across the spines of my husband's old poetry collections, comforted by their familiar weight. I retrieved my purse, the velvet pouch with Felicity's pearls snug inside. The pearls would return to my jewelry box, a treasure, and a reminder of the bond that transcended time. As I prepared to leave the house, I paused in the foyer. The morning sunlight streamed through the stained glass panel on the front door, casting rainbow-hued patterns on the floor. The Morton family crest, painted in deep greens and golds, glowed like a beacon. Here, among portraits and memories, lay the essence of who we were and what we had endured. I knelt and picked up a handful of fallen rose petals from the velvet runner. Their scent lingered in my hand, sweet, nostalgic, ephemeral. I blew them gently across the room, watching as they fluttered like small, fragile birds finding flight. Goodbye, my dear friend, I whispered to the silent house. Outside, the sky continued to clear, unveiling a brilliant expanse of blue. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the journey ahead. Isabella wrapped a shawl around my shoulders, and Colin lifted my suitcase into the car. Together, we loaded my belongings, and I pressed a final kiss to Margaret's cheek. Be well, she whispered, hugging me gently. I will, I promised. Simon approached, placing a heavy parcel in my hands. For your garden? He said. Seeds from Mother's heirloom rosebush. Plant them in Willowbrook, so her memory can grow there too. Tears filled my eyes as I held the packet of seeds, the Morton family crest stamped on its parchment envelope. Thank you, I said, voice thick with emotion. He nodded, and Isabella slipped an arm around my waist as we walked toward the waiting car. The drive to the train station was peaceful. The countryside rolled by, verdant fields dotted with lambs. I watched the world slip past the window, reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. Grief and betrayal, but also unity and renewal. At the station, I hugged each of them in turn. Isabella, now steadfast and serene. Colin, whose forgiveness and love had anchored me. Simon, whose conviction and guilt had awakened my resolve. Margaret, whose partnership had turned tears into action. Thank you for everything, I whispered. Take care, Isabella said, brushing a tear from my cheek. Hortense! I looked up to see a small figure racing toward me. Margaret's daughter, Phoebe, a spirited 6-year-old with curly brown hair. She threw her arms around my leg. Tell me stories about Aunt Felicity, she pleaded, looking up at me with wide eyes. I knelt to her level and brushed a stray curl from her forehead. She was the kindest, bravest woman I ever knew, I said. Phoebe's eyes shone. Will you tell me now? Not now, I said with a soft laugh. But I promise I will when I return. We will sit together in the garden, and I will tell you all about her. She nodded, satisfied, and I gave her a gentle hug. Then it was time to board. I lifted my suitcase onto the train and found my seat by the window. Isabella and Colin stood on the platform, waving until the train moved, their faces receding into the distance. As the train picked up speed, I held the packet of rose seeds in my hand, tracing the Morton crest with my thumb. The journey back to Willowbrook was quiet and contemplative. I watched the world unfurl, hedgerows, grazing sheep, the patchwork of fields. Nostalgia and hope entwined in my chest. Soon I would be home, among my own rose garden and familiar comforts. Yet a piece of my heart remained in Oxford, where Felicity's legacy would bloom. When I arrived at Willowbrook Station, dusk had settled over the village. The lampposts glowed like watchful sentinels. My neighbor, Beatrice, waited with a bouquet of freshly cut wildflowers. She clasped me in a warm embrace. "Welcome home," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you," I replied, letting tears slip down my cheeks. She guided me to her car, and we drove the short distance to my cottage. The path was lined with foxgloves and daisies, moonlight painting silver edges on the foliage. I inhaled the familiar scent of home: damp earth, aged wood, lavender from my window boxes. Inside, my cottage was quiet, but every room held echoes of my life's tapestry. I placed the bouquet of wildflowers on the kitchen table, then padded into the living room, where my knitting lay forgotten on the sofa. I picked up the needles and resumed my work, a soft blanket for the animal shelter, finding solace in the familiar click of the wood against wool. As I knit, I thought of the Morton house, the hospital wing, and the seeds waiting to be planted. My life had expanded in the last week, bound by love and loss. I was not the same woman who had boarded that train in grief and confusion. I was stronger, tempered by the fire of adversity. Night fully settled, and the moon shone through the lace, curtains illuminating the blanket on my lap. I set aside my knitting and rose, retrieving the envelope of rose seeds from my purse. I traced the crest again, then prepared to plant them in my garden at first light. Tomorrow, a new chapter would begin, rooted in the past but reaching toward the future. I whispered into the stillness of the night, "This is for you, Felicity." The silence that followed was a lullaby, cradling me as I drifted into sleep, the promise of morning and the whisper of growth guiding me onward. "She's proposed a settlement, Mrs. Fairchild. She was hoping to discuss it in person." My heart fluttered with unease. I had thought Morgana's last attempt would be in the solicitor's office. This felt like another skirmish. A settlement. For what? "She's willing to renounce her claim entirely if you agree to forego any further legal action against her. She also proposes a private apology." My pulse quickened. Apology or no apology, she could not erase the pain she'd inflicted. And yet, the specter of prolonged litigation felt heavy. I glanced at Jade and Max, engrossed in chasing butterflies near the rose bushes. Their laughter was a balm to my soul. "I appreciate the offer," I said carefully, "but I'm not certain if I'm prepared to negotiate in that way." Mr. Peters lifted an eyebrow. "Morgana insists it's a gesture of goodwill. She'll pay the legal fees incurred thus far, and she'll donate an additional sum to Westgate Children's Hospital on your behalf." I felt conflicted. The idea of Morgana repaying our expenses and supporting the hospital was tempting, yet I worried it was merely a tactic to obscure her wrongdoing, to rewrite history in her favor. "Where is she now?" I asked, voice measured. "She's in Oxford," he replied. "I'm not going back to Oxford," I said softly, a finality in my tone. "Mrs. Fairchild," he began, but I interrupted. "This story has been long enough." My voice, though quiet, carried the weight of conviction. Mr. Peters hesitated, as if gauging whether I would relent. "I am not interested in her money or her apologies. I want nothing more to do with Morgana's machinations." He studied me for a moment, then inclined his head. "Very well, Mrs. Fairchild. Morgana will be informed of your decision." I exhaled as he turned and walked back to his car. I watched the sedan cross the meadow and disappear down the lane. The hush left. Behind felt like a fragile peace, one I would guard fiercely. "Are you okay?" Isabella's voice trembled behind me. She and Colin had arrived quietly, but I hadn't noticed them. "Yes," I replied, embracing her. "It's done." She brushed a tear from my cheek as Max and Jade ran toward us, breathless and stained with pollen. "What happened?" Jade asked, concern furrowing her brow. I exchanged a look with Isabella. "A lawyer came to see me," I explained. "But everything is settled. We can focus on the roses now. Isabella nodded, relief flooding her features. Let's go inside and have some tea, she said, taking Jade's hand. Colin ruffled Max's hair and offered me his arm. Shall we? He asked. Yes, I said, allowing him to guide me back, toward the cottage. Inside, the kitchen felt warm and safe. Beatrice stood at the stove, flipping pancakes with a practiced hand. The aroma of maple syrup and spiced apples filled the air. Margaret's cat, Triangles, pranced around our ankles, mewing for attention. Tea? Beatrice asked, pouring a fresh pot. Please, I replied, sinking into a chair. She set down a tray of teacups and scones. You look tired, Beatrice said softly. It was a long morning, I admitted, wrapping my hands around the warm teacup. Beatrice held my gaze. You did the right thing, she said. Living with her half-apology would only have invited more trouble. I nodded, sipping my tea. Thank you, Beatrice. Isabella perched on a stool at the counter, feeding Max a piece of scone. Mum, when does the first new rose bloom appear? Jade asked, swirling her tea thoughtfully. Give it a few weeks, I said. Patience is part of gardening and life. At that moment, my phone buzzed with a message from Margaret. Thank you for everything. The hospital wing is now officially approved. We celebrate next Sunday. Love, Margaret. I felt a glow of gratitude. They approved the wing, I announced, showing the message to Isabella. That's wonderful, she exclaimed, leaning in to read. I set the phone down, considering how ordinary family life had intertwined with extraordinary events. A legal battle, a funeral, a return to roots, all woven into a tapestry of resilience and love. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. Isabella laughed softly, and even Max giggled, though he had no idea what prompted the sudden cheer. Jade gave me a puzzled look, and I smiled. Ignore Aunt Tess, Isabella whispered, but the sparkle in her eyes told me she cherished every moment. We spent the rest of the afternoon tending to the garden, together. Isabella helped Jade practice a new watering can technique, while Colin and Max dug small holes for the next patch of lavender. I instructed them on how to gently pat the soil around each plant, teaching them that nurturing required both strength and tenderness. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, I stood at the edge of the garden with Colin. You know, he said, watching you today, I realized how much you've given us. Not just love, but courage to stand up when we're afraid. Thank you for that. I reached out and took his hand. We're family. He smiled, letting his gaze roam over the blooms. Yes, we are. Night fell gently over Willowbrook, the air cooling and the first stars beginning to peek from the vast velvet sky. Inside the cottage, Beatrice had set out plates of warm scones and a pot of chamomile tea, ready for the family's evening ritual. Isabella read a bedtime story to the children as I repaired a loose hinge on the front gate, a small act that felt emblematic of the day's work to mend and fortify. When the children were tucked in, Isabella and Colin stayed to chat in the kitchen. I listened for a moment, their hushed voices a lullaby of normalcy. Finally, I excused myself and retreated to my bedroom. There, I knelt by my bedside, next to a small wooden box containing Felicity's letters and photographs. I opened the box and gently lifted out a letter, one I had written to Colin weeks ago, intercepted by Morgana. I read the familiar words, my breath catching as memories washed over me. My hope that Colin was well, my love for him and Isabella, my excitement to see them soon. Tears sprang to my eyes as I remembered the pain their loss had caused. I closed the box and pressed it to my chest, savoring the tactile connection to those days of uncertainty. My reflection in the bedside mirror caught my eye, a face softened by grief but strengthened by experience. I traced the lines around my eyes, a testament to laughter and sorrow intertwined. Good night, my dear friend. I whispered, placing the box back on its shelf. I lay on the bed, the weight of the day's triumphs and the promise of tomorrow mingling in my heart. Outside, the garden rested under a blanket of moonlight, the newly planted roses waiting for dawn. I closed my eyes, trusting the sea of stars above, and drifted into sleep with a heart full of gratitude and steadfast hope. I woke before dawn, the gentle pulse of memory rousing me from a night of deep, restorative sleep. The moon had long departed, and a pale, silvery light seeped through my bedroom curtains, illuminating the room in soft luminosity. The air felt cool against my skin, carrying the faint scent of dew on roses. In my mind, a clear thought echoed. Days like this were a gift, a chance to breathe in gratitude for survival and renewal. Sliding out of bed, I placed my feet on the wooden floor, its smooth surface cool under my slippers. I wrapped myself in a soft wrap that smelled faintly of lavender, my own bed linens, fresh from the wash. In that moment, the quiet of the cottage felt like a warm embrace. Everything was hushed, the garden outside, the little village beyond, and even the distant echo of roosters greeting the dawn. I lingered in the stillness, allowing my mind to drift over the journey that had led me here. The past week felt simultaneously like a lifetime and a fleeting dream. I recalled the whirlwind, Morgana's lies, the shock of loss at Aunt Felicity's passing, the solemnity of the funeral, and the storm of betrayal that threatened to pull our family into darkness. Yet in its wake, we had unearthed truths that fractured deceit and helped us rediscover unity. The Morton Pediatric Wing was approved. Simon and his sons had reclaimed the family home from Morgana's machinations, and Isabella had reoriented towards hope rather than guilt. I loved how the community in Oxford had rallied behind us, friends and neighbors ensuring that Felicity's vision would endure long after that fateful day. Now, standing in the threshold of my bedroom, I realized that this peace, this precious, morning calm, was as profound a transformation as any legal victory or garden bloom. It was an internal sunrise, a quiet shift in the heart. To honor that feeling, I decided to begin the day in the same place where I had fallen asleep, in the garden among the roses. I dressed quietly, slipping into a comfortable pair of slacks and a pastel-hued blouse. I pulled my hair into a loose ponytail, securing it with a silk ribbon that Felicity had given me one winter. Her gift had always reminded me of her thoughtfulness. I stepped into the hallway barefoot, slowed my breathing, and descended the creaking stairs. The kitchen hearth was cold, but a kettle stood ready, Beatrice's habit of preparing for a bustling day. I poured water into the tea kettle, set it on the stove, and lit the small burner beneath it. While the water heated, I lit a single candle. On the kitchen table, a small white pillar whose flame danced gently. Above it, on the windowsill, sat a vase of wildflowers Beatrice had delivered the previous afternoon. Daisies, cornflowers, and a sprig of mint. The subtle fragrance mingled with the aroma of brewing chamomile tea, filling the room with quiet solace. When the water reached a rolling boil, I poured it into a porcelain teapot, letting the chamomile blossoms steep, their golden petals unfurling, like tiny lanterns. I ladled a cup of tea into a blue-patterned cup, warmed it briefly, and carried it outside. The wooden porch was cool under my feet, dew still clinging to the planks. I settled into the rocker, letting the smooth wood cradle me, and sipped the tea. The warmth seeped into my chest, soothing the residual edges of tension within me. I let my eyes wander over the garden. The roses had begun to bloom in earnest, petals unfolding in shades of crimson, peach, and ivory. The morning sunlight caught them at their most delicate, casting long shadows across the soil where we had planted Felicity's heirloom rose seeds. I rose from the chair and approached the plot where those seeds had been tucked just days ago. Now, miniature stems rose from the soil, tiny green flags pointing toward the heavens. We had planted those seeds with hope, for remembrance, for renewal, for legacy. I knelt beside them, brushing a fingertip across one delicate leaf. "You are doing well," I murmured, as if the blossoms could hear me. Beside the roses, the forget-me-nots we'd sown with Jade and Max now carpeted the earth in tiny clusters of sky blue. Their petals seemed to whisper the promise of remembrance, an affirmation that life, though fragile, endured. I let the morning breeze carry away any residual worries, replacing them with purpose. I would nurture this garden as I had nurtured the vulnerable threads of family ties. To do so, I needed to commit to the tasks of the day. Ascending the stone path toward the front gate, I collected the mail that had arrived. Among the letters were printed notices, an invitation to the Morton Pediatric Wing dedication, a thank you note from the hospital administrator, and a reminder of a meeting scheduled later in the week for Felicity's memorial fund. I tucked each into my purse, determined to see them through with diligence. Today, I would return to Oxford for a brief visit to attend to a final detail: the unveiling of the hospital's small commemorative plaque, which would bear Felicity's name, and the date of the wing's completion. I locked the gate behind me and walked down the lane toward the village bus stop. The road was quiet, bordered by hedgerows thick with honeysuckle and bird-singing oaks. I breathed in the early morning air, fresh, sweet, regenerative, thinking about the dichotomy of my experiences. Oxford had been a crucible of grief and betrayal, but Willowbrook was the cradle of recovery and growth. I was fortunate to straddle both worlds, carrying lessons from one into the other. An elderly neighbor, Mr. Chalk, spotted me from his porch. He waved a hand, a patchwork quilt of morning light and shadows accentuating his lined face. "Morning, Mrs. Fairchild," he called, his voice rich with years of familiarity. "Good morning, Mr. Chalk," I replied with a warm smile. "Tea in the garden?" he offered. "Perhaps later," I answered, as the bus rounded the corner. I climbed aboard, greeted by the hush that settled over the single car. The driver nodded at me as I found a seat by the window. The journey to Oxford unfolded like a story, in reverse. Hills rolled away, fields whisked past, and the patchwork of cottages and farms shifted into suburban outskirts before trailing into the spires and red brick facades of Oxford's historic center. My heart beat with quiet determination. I had one more duty to fulfill before fully embracing life back in Willowbrook. When the bus pulled into the Oxford station, I disembarked and made my way to the hospital by foot, taking the familiar path through the fallen leaves of early spring. The Westgate Children's Hospital stood as a testament to Felicity's unwavering compassion. Banners fluttered near the entrance, announcing the dedication ceremony scheduled for this afternoon. Doctors in crisp white coats moved through glass. Double doors and families carrying young children passed in quiet reverence. I inhaled deeply, feeling gratitude and solemnity swirl within me. Inside, a small reception area had been arranged with floral wreaths and framed photographs of Felicity's philanthropic work. A portrait of her, draped with a ribbon, stood beside a table piled with hospital brochures. I approached the table, running my hand over a photograph of Felicity visiting the oncology ward, her smile bright as she comforted a frightened child. Familiar voice emerged from behind me. "Mrs. Fairchild?" Dr. Hargreaves said, extending a hand. His hair had grown silver since our last meeting, but his eyes retained the same compassionate warmth. "Good morning, Doctor," I replied, shaking his hand. "Thank you for inviting me." "The dedication is at 2:00. We had a representative from the local council ask me to thank you personally on behalf of the community." I nodded, humbled. "It's my honor." Felicity would have been thrilled. "Indeed." He gestured toward a side corridor. "Shall I show you to the chapel, where the plaque will be unveiled?" I followed him through silent halls flickering with the glow of emergency lights. At the end of the corridor, a small chapel awaited, its wooden pews polished, its stained glass windows reflecting fractured rainbows upon the marble floor. Sunlight, streamed through the panes, illuminating the space in crystalline hues. My heart felt as if it might burst under the weight of emotion. It was here, in this sacred hush, that we would honor Felicity's memory in a tangible way. A podium stood at the front, draped with a white cloth. Behind it, a brass plaque bore Felicity's name, still undisclosed beneath a dark velvet covering. I approached and gently ran my finger across the cool metal frame. "You did something remarkable, Mrs. Fairchild," Dr. Hargreaves murmured, stepping up beside me. "The wing is scheduled to be fully operational by the end of the month. Without your advocacy, none of this would have been possible." Tears pricked my eyes as I pressed a hand to the plaque. "It wasn't only me," I whispered. "It was you who made it happen." His gaze met mine, steady and kind. A hush fell as the chapel doors opened and hospital staff, families, and a few local dignitaries filed in. I stepped back as Dr. Hargreaves moved to the podium. "Welcome," his voice resonated through the chapel, firm yet gentle. "Today we celebrate the life and legacy of Felicity Morton, a woman whose compassion and generosity have touched countless lives. It is our privilege to unveil this plaque, which will stand as a testament to her enduring spirit." I knelt beside the plaque, steadying my breathing as Dr. Hargreaves pulled the velvet cloth away. The brass gleamed, reading in black-etched letters, "In loving memory of Felicity Morton, 1952-2025. Founder, Westgate Pediatric Wing. Her kindness bloomed, and hope prevailed." The room exhaled as if in collective reverence. Tears shimmered in the eyes of doctors, nurses, and families who had lost children to illness. I felt a quiet pride, warmed by the knowledge that Felicity's devotion would shelter so many young souls. After the unveiling, patients from the oncology ward were guided into the chapel, their small faces alight with curiosity. I knelt to speak, with a young girl named Harriet, whose cheeks were as pale as the daisies she clutched. "She would have loved you," I whispered, brushing a lock of hair from Harriet's forehead. Harriet gripped my hand. "I miss her," she said, voice trembling. "She's still here," I replied softly. "In every flower, every act of kindness, and in you." Harriet smiled faintly, and I held her hand for a moment longer before rising. The next hour passed. In a blur of conversation, reporters asked questions about Felicity's impact, families shared stories of hope, and nurses pointed out the progress being made in the pediatric wing, visible through the glass panels overlooking the chapel. With each exchange, I felt Felicity's spirit guiding me forward, reminding me that our actions rippled outward in ways we could never fully comprehend. When the ceremony concluded, I lingered in the chapel, letting the hushed light and the echo of footsteps fade into memory. I closed my eyes and whispered a silent prayer. "May your kindness continue to bloom, dear Felicity." Leaving the hospital, I felt lighter, as though a weight had been lifted. The rest of the day stretched ahead, an afternoon train ride back to Willowbrook, an evening spent strolling through the garden to check on the roses once more, and the simple comfort of bedtime with the knowledge that the world had taken a step toward healing. At the station, I purchased a ticket for the afternoon express. As I waited on the platform, I watched the wheels of the train glinting under the sun. I reflected on the vastness of life's tapestry, how threads of sorrow and joy interwove to create something beautiful and resilient. Though my heart carried tender scars, it also brimmed with gratitude for family, for friendship, and for the memory of a woman whose love had changed so many lives. The train arrived with a gentle hiss of steam and settled as though sighing in contentment. I boarded, found a window seat once again, and watched as Oxford's ancient stones receded. Soon, rolling fields of green and gold stretched into the horizon, and I pressed my forehead to the cool glass, closing my eyes against the motion. When I opened them again, Willowbrook's familiar contours came into view. Thatched rooftops, the sheltering arms of oaks, and in the distance, my own cottage nestled among the wildflowers. My heart felt at home long before the train had stopped. Upon arrival, I found Beatrice waiting at the platform, her welcoming smile as warm as the spring sun. I stepped off and wrapped her in a grateful embrace. "Welcome home," she said, her eyes sparkling. "The roses are waiting." I nodded, excitement flowering in my chest. "I've missed them," I replied. Together, we walked the half-mile home, sharing quiet conversation about the day's events, our voices mingling with the melody of birdsong. When I reached my gate, I paused, inhaling the aroma of new blooms, perhaps the scent of those heirloom roses reaching toward full blossom. Inside the garden, the roses stood taller now, buds plump with promise. I knelt beside one, a peach pink, bloom that had burst into gentle elegance overnight. I cupped its fragile petals, marveling at its perfection. "You made it," I whispered, as though addressing the entire plot. Beatrice leaned on the gate, watching me. "They're beautiful," she said, her voice soft with fondness. "They are," I agreed, brushing a tear from my cheek, not of sorrow, but of joy. A sudden rustle behind me made me turn, and I saw Isabella walking up the path with Jade and Max in tow. "Nan," Jade called, pointing to the roses. "Look at them," I said, taking Jade's small hand. "They're a reminder that life goes on, love endures, and beauty can spring from even the darkest trials." Max reached to touch a petal, but I gently guided his hand to stroke the soft edge. "Be gentle," I told him. "They're precious." He nodded solemnly, and I realized that these moments, the quiet teaching of patience, the passing of values from one generation to the next, were perhaps Felicity's greatest legacy. That evening, as twilight draped the village in soft indigo, I sat on the porch rocker with a cup of lavender tea. Isabella and Colin were inside, putting the children to bed. The lights in the nearby cottages winked on one by one, and the hush deepened until only the chirping of crickets remained. With each sip of tea, I reflected on the completeness of this chapter. Aunt Felicity's story had begun with generous love, was bent by unexpected tragedy, yet rose triumphant through the devotion of those who refused to betray her memory. Morgana's shadow had receded, unable to withstand the light of truth. Simon and his sons had reclaimed not just a home, but reclaiming integrity. Isabella and Colin had found forgiveness and strength. Jade and Max had learned the gentle power of new life. As darkness deepened, I rose from the rocker and stood beneath the glow of a single star that shone with uncommon clarity. I closed my eyes, raising my face to the heavens. "Thank you," I whispered into the night, "for every gift, every lesson, every bloom." In that moment, I understood that our stories, woven through laughter and tears, were eternal. Though this part of my life had reached its crescendo, the garden of memory would continue to grow, its roots deep and unbreakable. Tonight, I would sleep knowing that love like the roses would continue to flourish. Tomorrow, a new dawn would come, carrying with it fresh hopes and possibilities, and so I breathed in the night air one last time before returning to the cottage. For every ending, there was a beginning. For every loss, there was renewal. Life would always unfold in seasons, letting go of winter's cold, embracing spring's promise, and reveling in summer's warmth. Tonight, I rested in gratitude for every cherished moment and looked forward to the dawn when the roses of Willowbrook would greet me once more. Tomorrow, I would wake to the first song of the lark and the gentle hum of bees in the lavender. But tonight, as the moon illuminated the garden, I allowed myself to rest, enveloped by the knowledge that life, though fragile, was undeniably resilient. I had weathered storms of grief, deceit, and doubt, emerging on the other side with a deeper appreciation for the tapestry of love that bound us together. Tonight, I drifted into sleep with a heart nourished by gratitude and a quiet hope for all the tomorrows yet to come. When morning arrived, it brought with it an early chorus of sparrows and the gentle rustling of leaves. I awoke slowly, drawing in a deep breath that carried the sweet fragrance of roses and honeysuckle. The curtains were pulled aside, and the dawn light spilled in, illuminating my small bedroom in a golden glow. I sat up, allowing my senses to drink in the moment, the soft patter of dew dripping from petals, the distant call of a nightingale, and the rhythmic ticking of the antique clock on my dresser. I dressed in a soft cotton dress the color of pale peach, its fabric lightweight and breezy, perfect for a summer's morning. I added a cardigan over my shoulders in case a breeze drifted through the open windows. My hair, now streaked with silver, was braided down my back as it often had been when Arthur was alive. Sometimes I missed his presence in the quiet of morning, but I knew he watched over me in spirit, and that Aunt Felicity, too, was near, smiling as I tended to the life and beauty we both loved. Leaving the cottage, I stepped into the garden, where the roses had matured into a glorious display of color. Crimson, apricot, and ivory blossoms unfurled in the sun, and the lavender hedges hummed with bees gathering nectar. The forget-me-nots had multiplied into a sea of sky-blue petals that lined the edges of the pathways. I breathed deeply, savoring the vibrant symphony of life, and knelt to touch a dew-sprinkled rose, a testament to the seasons that had passed and the nurturing care that had brought it forth. A soft crunch of gravel announced Isabel's approach. She emerged from the front, gate holding a small gardening basket. Jade and Max trailed behind, their faces bright with anticipation. "Nan, look!" Jade exclaimed, pointing to a cluster of morning glories climbing a trellis near the fence. "They've bloomed overnight," I said, marveling at the trumpet-shaped flowers, pale lavender petals with ribbons of violet at their centers. Even more reasons to love summer. Max reached out to grasp a flower, careful not to crush its delicate petals. "They're like trumpets announcing the sun," he said, solemnly echoing a phrase I had often used to describe flowers in Arthur's garden. Isabella smiled, beaming, with pride. "He would have loved to see this," she said, referring to my late husband. I nodded, pressing a hand to my chest. He would have smiled. Together, we spent the next hour weeding the flower beds and guiding the children in gentle pruning, removing spent blossoms to encourage further growth. We talked quietly about summer plans, a picnic by the river, a weekend trip to see the county fair, and the children's excitement for the upcoming school year. As we worked, I observed how the garden had become a nexus for family bonding, a place where worries melted away beneath the warm sunshine and the laughter of children. Later, with the chores complete, we gathered on the porch. The afternoon. Breeze carried the distant laughter of neighbors and the melodic hum of a tractor in a nearby field. Isabella poured iced mint tea into crystal tumblers, and I sat in the rocker, feeling my shoulders relax as I savored the refreshing taste of mint and lemon. Jade and Max chased each other across the lawn, their laughter a joyous soundtrack. I found my thoughts wandering to Morgana's fate. We had not heard from her since the day I refused her settlement offer. It occurred to me that she remained, a ghost at the edges of our lives, a cautionary tale of the power and betrayal that can lurk within family. I decided that, though we had vanquished her influence, I might still wish to extend a final olive branch, not to welcome her back into our lives, but to liberate my heart from any lingering bitterness. Putting down my tea, I rose and walked to the gate. The gravel path led to the lane where the white postbox stood. Taking the pen and paper from my bag, I wrote a brief letter to Morgana. It read, "Morgana, I have chosen to let the past remain where it belongs. In the memories, we cannot change. Please do not respond to this letter. Let this be the end of the story that binds us in regret. Sincerely, Hortense Fairchild." I folded the letter and placed it in an envelope addressed to Morgana at her unknown Oxford residence. As I slipped it into the postbox, I felt a weight lift from my chest. Forgiveness, I realized, was a gift I gave to myself as much as to anyone else. Though Morgana might never read my words, the act of letting go felt like tending the deepest roots of my own heart. Returning to the porch, I noticed a shadow where the morning glories flared. A foxglove had bent beneath the weight of its own blooms. I straightened the stem and smiled wistfully at nature's gentle reliance on care. A sudden knock on the gate announced a visitor. I turned to see Margaret walking up the lane with her daughter Phoebe trailing behind. Margaret carried a wicker basket brimming with sun-ripened strawberries. "Hortense," she called, her voice a bright note of kinship. I crossed the yard to embrace her. Phoebe, with her head full of curls and her eyes alight with curiosity, ran to plant a kiss on my cheek. "Nan, will you tell me more about Aunt Felicity?" she asked, peering up at me with unbridled enthusiasm. I knelt to her level, brushing a strand of hair back from her face. "Certainly, dear. Let's sit down and I'll share stories you've never heard." We settled on the porch, the 3 generations occupying weathered rocking chairs that creaked in sweet rhythm. As I began to speak, I recounted tales of Felicity's tireless work. The time she organized a holiday party for patients who thought they would spend Christmas in the hospital. The Saturday morning she spent reading to children who couldn't attend school, and how she once knitted dozens of baby hats for the neonatal unit, each one topped with a tiny pom-pom. Phoebe listened with wide-eyed wonder, while Margaret glanced at me with pride, her expression softening with every fond recollection. She was the kindest person I ever knew, I concluded, my voice hushed. Phoebe leaned into my side. "I wish I had known her," she whispered. "In many ways you do," I replied, gently tickling her nose. "Every time we plant a rose, every time we care for someone in need, you carry a part of her with you." We lingered on the porch for a few more moments, the conversation weaving a tapestry of memory and hope. "Before you go," Margaret said, "take some strawberries. They're from our greenhouse. They're sweet and ripe." I accepted a handful, savoring the bright flavor. Sweet with a hint of tartness, like summer encapsulated in a berry. I shared them with Jade and Max, who giggled when juice dripped down their chins. "Nan, can we make strawberry shortcake today?" Max asked, the suggestion bright as his grin. "That sounds like a splendid idea," I replied, gathering plates and napkins. Inside the cottage, the kitchen was warm and inviting. Beatrice bustled about, rolling out dough for the shortcake biscuits while humming an old folk tune. Flour dusted her hair, and her apron was streaked with berry juice. She hummed a gentle welcome as we arrived. "You spread a lot of joy around, Hortense," she remarked, whisking cream into soft peaks. I leaned against the counter, watching the simple ritual of baking. "I'm learning that the small moments can matter just as much as the big ones," I said, reaching for a berry and popping it into my mouth. "Indeed," she replied, smiling. Jade and Max perched on stools at the counter, eagerly helping to assemble the shortcakes. They spread whipped cream generously, then layered slices of bright red strawberries between the buttery biscuits. The kitchen filled with laughter, the earthy scent of baked dough mingling with the sweetness of berries. As I assembled my own shortcake, my thoughts drifted to the years ahead. The garden would continue to flourish, each season bringing new blossoms: summer's roses, autumn's dahlias, winter's camellias, and spring's daffodils. And with each bloom, Aunt Felicity's legacy would live on, reminding us of the tender strength found in compassion. By mid-afternoon, the shortcakes were plated and shared on the porch. I watched my family savor each bite, their faces aglow with the simple pleasure of sweet strawberries and cream. Isabella and Colin held hands across the table, while Jade and Max compared the juices that had dripped down their chins. The sun shone warmly, and even the breeze seemed to sigh in contentment. As the day waned, I excused myself and walked to the back of the garden. There, beneath the shade of a broad oak, a small bench awaited me. I sat and gazed upon the rose, bushes now ablaze with color, their petals fluttering in the gentle breeze. Farther beyond, the lavender hedges swayed like a violet sea, and the honeysuckle vines shimmered against the fence. I closed my eyes and let my mind wander through the tapestry of memories. Arthur's steady companionship, Aunt Felicity's boundless kindness, Isabella and Colin's strength as parents, and the unrelenting curiosity of Jade and Max. Each thread wove together to form a story of perseverance, love, and unwavering hope. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them, subscribe, and turn on notifications. For in life, as in gardening, there was always another season to cherish, another lesson to learn, and another page to turn. My journey had reached its conclusion, but the narrative of love and renewal would continue, blooming bright long after today's sun had set.